My name is Dr. Herbert Ausubel. My career has been in medicine since my graduation from Harvard Medical School more than 6 decades ago. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. It was the Great Depression. Times were hard. My parents couldn't afford a hospital, and so I was born in my parents' apartment. At that time, my family was greatly concerned for the survival of the Jewish people with the advent of Adolf Hitler and Nazism in Germany. Yes, I had to get a career and achieve in it, but I also had a responsibility to do everything I could for the survival of the Jewish people. I had 3 roommates when I was a child. One of them was my grandfather, my father's father. His name was Judah Ausubel. He loved to tell me stories that had been handed down to him by his forebears. Later on, I would write down the stories that he told me. Studying all these stories, I was able to follow the ancestry of my family back to the 16th century, when my direct ancestor, Dr. David Ausubel, came into Europe. As I said, I had to develop a career. My wife and I traveled around the world, and we collected material on 6 ancestral families, 3 on my side and 3 on my wife's side. The sum of the experiences of these 6 families was to serve as a microcosm of the history of the Jewish people. The first of the 6 books to come out was Flower of God, subtitled A Jewish Family's 3,000-Year Journey from Spice to Medicine. It was the story of my father's ancestral family. That book has won major international awards and has received perhaps the finest collection of 5-star, every one of them was 5-star, reviews on Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com, The Book Diva, etc. I've been on television for many years. In each television program, I focus in on one member of my ancestral family. Tonight, I would like to focus in on my paternal grandmother, whose wisdom is largely responsible for the fact that my family survived and that I am living in the United States. She was born Chaya Sura Korn, the eldest daughter of a wealthy Jew. In fact, Jacob Korn, her father, was the wealthiest, wisest, and most forward-thinking Jew in the town of Rozvadov, which was situated on the west bank of the San River in Galicia, which at that time was part of Austria-Hungary. I said he was the wealthiest. Well, that was because he owned a shipbuilding company which produced barges that carried produce, etc., from Galicia down the San River to the Vistula River to Danzig in what today would be called or what was then called Germany. He also owned a ferry line across the river. I said he was the wisest. I give you 3 examples. He was a lover of music, and so he built a quartet of string instruments and learned to play each of them. I'm sure he was not Jascha Heifetz on the violin, but the mere fact that he was able to produce and play all 4 string instruments is an achievement of itself. He was a lover of accuracy of time, and so he built a grandfather clock, the one and only grandfather clock he ever built, and it was considered the finest timepiece in all of Galicia. People came from far and wide to admire this grandfather clock. He was also a lover of the healing arts, and so he compounded medicines from plants. There was no physician in Rosvedov. When someone was seriously ill, they would ask him if he would be so kind as to help that person. He did so not for any monetary reward, but as a mitzvah, a good deed. At one time, there was a child in the town, seemingly near death. He went to the house of this child. For 4 days and nights, he sat at the bedside of this child, spoon-feeding it various medicines which he had compounded. And when this child miraculously recovered and was restored to excellent health, he was called the miracle maker, and men would tip their hats to him when he walked down the street. This now is in the 1870s, and Jewish boys in the town never went to a government school. That was because schools were held on the Sabbath, and that would be a violation of religious law, and they were all Orthodox Jews. What they did is they went to Cheder, which was a Hebrew elementary school. And if the child were bright enough and his family could afford it, he went on to the yeshiva, where he got advanced religious education, but they did not teach mathematics, science, or any such thing in the yeshiva. Girls received no schooling whatsoever. They're expected to learn to cook and clean and take care of a home, which would be their responsibility in life. Jacob Korn felt that this was wrong. He wanted his daughters to get an education. He had many sons and many daughters. He was a man of wealth, and so he built a school, or had built a schoolhouse on his property, hired a faculty to teach his daughters not only religious material, but mathematics and science, music, history, and philosophy. They got a better education than any boy in all of Rosvedov. My grandmother was the eldest of his children, and plainly the brightest. Now she was reaching age for marriage. She had 2 problems. First of which, she was 5 feet 9 inches in height, taller than any girl in Rosvedov, and taller than most of the men. But you can marry a girl who's taller than you, the world wouldn't come to an end. Her second problem was that she had expressed the opinion to women in the town that she would like her husband to be a man who would respect her opinion, just as she would respect his opinion. And so word went around town, you marry Chayzach Sura Korn and you get money and a headache. And so she arrived at the age of 21, unmarried. That was classified as a spinster. Along comes my grandfather, Judah Ausubel. Judah was the son of a scholar. His father's name was Moses Ausubel. His father was a scholar without a purse to match his intellectual accomplishments. He was the sexton of the synagogue, but there was no income for being the sexton of the synagogue, only honor. He did have an occupation. He was what they called a Kvittelschreiber, a writer of documents. If you were a person of any means, and you had a legal problem, you went to an attorney. If you were a poor person, you went to the Quittelschreiber, who for a penny or two would handle all your affairs. From a penny or two, you weren't going to become rich. Moses had married, and his wife passed away during her 7th pregnancy at the age of 25, leaving 5 living children, a 6th having died of a childhood disease. My grandfather was the Pidyon Aben, the firstborn son. Moses remarried the second wife, hoping that there would be food on the table for the children that she was hoping to bring into the world, was anxious to get as many mouths off their food chain as possible. And so my grandfather, at the age of 8, was sent off to become the apprentice to a carpenter that would take him off the family food chain. He was now on the carpenter's food chain. The carpenter had 11 children, and so my grandfather was 14th in line for food. You can imagine what was left for him to eat, maybe a potato peel. As a result, he ended up quite short. When he reached adulthood, he was 4 feet 10, even too short for the Austrian army. So he became a master carpenter. At that time, the leading Polish nobleman in Galicia was the Prince Lubomirski, and the prince had gone to Paris and had purchased a Louis XV chair. He wanted 15 more such chairs around his dining room table. So there was a competition. The one who could make a Louis XV chair, which would be perfectly like that Paris chair, would get a requisition to build 15 Louis XV chairs. My grandfather won the competition, and so he was to make 15 Louis XV chairs, and in addition, the prince was so pleased with his work, he was to be the exclusive builder of furniture for the prince. But of course, he only got paid when he made something. He didn't get a steady salary. But in any case, he was making money. So he made money and saved it and bought a piece of property. And on that property, he built a house. And he built all the furniture for the house. And then he presented it to his father and stepmother to house them and all the children of both marriages. Honor thy father and thy mother was taken very seriously in my family. He then worked and saved and purchased another piece of property, and on it he built a workshop. After all, there were times when he didn't have an order from the prince. He could now do stuff for other people. Then he saved some more money and purchased another piece of property and built a house on it and furnished the house. And now he was 27 years of age, an aged bachelor seeking to get married. Well, one day he got a requisition from Jacob Korn to build a cabinet for his study. He was a man of wealth, he could afford a study. And so he built this cabinet, but it was too large to fit through the door to the study, and so he disassembled it with the intention of reassembling it inside the study. Who should be seated behind the desk in the study, reading books and writing pages and pages of notes? Chaya Sura Korn. He may not have noticed that she was about a foot taller than him because she was behind the desk. He'd never seen a woman who could read. And when he came home that evening, he told his father he would like to marry that woman. His father was shocked. My God, if word gets out, you're a single man, she's a single woman, you were together without a chaperone, the girl's reputation will be destroyed. Well, Judah pointed out, look, he was just there as a workman. He wasn't a suitor. He never said a word to her. So then the father told him about what was said about town, about her wanting a husband who would respect her opinion, just as she would respect his. To which he responded, I'd be honored to have such an intelligent woman teach me. And that became the key when Moses Ausubel went to Jacob Korn to propose the possibility of a marriage. And so they were married. And my father was the firstborn son of that marriage. He was Avrum Beirish in Hebrew. He was called Adolf in German. Bear in mind, there was no Adolf Hitler on the scene. It would be hard to picture any Jewish family would name his son Adolf today. And there was a wealthy Jewish nobleman in Vienna by the name of the Baron de Hirsch, who felt that Orthodox Jewish boys were not being prepared for this 20th century that they were going into, because they didn't learn anything about mathematics and science and so forth in the yeshiva. And so he put up the money to build a chain of schools throughout the empire in which Orthodox Jewish boys could learn mathematics and science and history and philosophy as well as religious material. And the calendar would be a Jewish calendar so that they wouldn't have to go to school on the Sabbath. And he opened the first school in Galicia. My father entered that first school in Galicia. And he was clearly the smartest student in the school. And the hope was that he would be the first Jewish boy from Galicia to go to the University of Vienna. Along comes World War I. Forget about going to the university, there's a war to be fought. Now, as I say, my grandmother was a very wise woman. Over the years, she had seen thousands and thousands of Jews fleeing the pogroms in Russia, coming through Rozvedov on their way west. And so she knew that life in Russia for a Jew is not good. Now, the Austrian army was never the greatest of armies. The Austrians fought pretty well. The Hungarians were good fighters. But if you were a Pole, or a Czech, or a Slovak, or a Ruthenian, or a Serb, or a Croat, or an Italian, or any one of the other of the many minorities which made up more than half the population of Austria-Hungary, you weren't that interested in getting killed fighting for the Kaiser. And so when the bullets went flying, you went running. And so the Austrian army, which had initially pushed into Russia, was in retreat. And you could hear the cannon fire in Rozvedov as the Russians were approaching. And my grandmother says to my grandfather, "We get out." Incidentally, my grandfather followed one rule in marriage. Whenever there was a problem, he presented it to his wife. And she would give her advice, and he would say, "I agree 100%. And you men listening to me tonight, bear that in mind. When you have a wise wife and tells you what to do, do it." In any case, the family fled to Vienna, which turned out to be a very wise move. When the Russians captured these villages in eastern Galicia, first thing they did was round up all the Jews. And they were force marched out of these towns to a central collecting point, Zakharkov, which was from Rozvedov about 100 miles away. Those who could not keep up, they used for bayonet practice. And the roadsides were strewn with the bodies of hundreds, if not thousands, of Jews who were so slaughtered, they weren't going to waste bullets. From Zakharkov, they were pushed into sealed boxcars, packed like sardines, and shipped to central Siberia, and dumped in 6 feet of snow to die. Of perhaps 100,000 Jews so shipped to Siberia, perhaps 1,000 were alive by the end of the war. And so my grandmother's wisdom in having the family go to Vienna saved them. The war went on. And they were living in Vienna. And Austria and Germany lost the war. So the issue is now go back to Rozvedov. After all, your father was a wealthy man and you have property and so forth and so on. My grandmother says, we do not go back. Poles have taken over all our properties. If we come back to claim them, they'll kill us. Any of you who have seen a recent movie that won the Academy Award as the best foreign film? It was called Ida, made in Poland by Poles. And they described exactly what happened when Jews came back to claim their property. They were killed so that there would be no question of them taking back the property. that others had taken over. So again, my grandmother's wisdom enabled the family to survive. Well, it is now the end of the war. My grandfather may have been an accomplished maker of furniture in Galicia, but nobody knew him in Vienna. So it was up to my father, an extremely bright individual, to make some money so the family would survive. He went to work in a shoe factory. Within 1 year, he was managing the greatest shoe factory in Austria. And he was also a writer. He was producing plays for the German stage and the Yiddish stage, accomplished in both. Along comes 1921, and they were having anti-Semitic riots all across Austria and Germany. Why? They were blaming the Jews for losing the war. Anyone with a brain would know it's because the United States entered the war that enabled the Allies to be victorious. But kill a couple of hundred Jews, and you feel so much better. In any case, my grandmother says to my father, "You will go to America. You will work and save and bring over your father, mother, and all your sisters and brothers." And as if commanded by the Almighty, my father came to the United States. And so I was born in the United States instead of ending up in a gas chamber in the Holocaust. So it was the wisdom of my grandmother in her recognizing the world that enabled our family to survive. For me to be here this evening to tell you my story and the story of my family. We live in a world where there are tragedies every day. We see today something happening to Christians in the Middle East that happened to Jews for centuries in Europe. You either become one of the same that the ISIS are, or they chop your head off. The message I have always sought to convey is that those who remain silent when wrong is done serve as accomplices to the wrongdoing. If you're a white down south and they're lynching a black man, you say, "It's none of my business," then you're an accomplice to the crime. And the people who sat back idly and said, "Well, they're Jews and we're Christians, it's not my problem," and do nothing, then they are accomplices to the crime. And I urge you all this evening, hopefully, to read my book and learn more about the lessons of history. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Central TV.
Properly inflating my tires burns less fuel and saves me money on gas. Yeah, I'm saving Mother Nature from pollution, but more importantly, she saved me $11.
Environmental defense. Get green.
By keeping my car regularly tuned, I save money on gas and repairs. That also means cleaner air. You know, feels good to help save the cash, planet.
Environmental defense. Get green. For more tips, go to getgreen.com.
week we return all our cans and bottles. Yeah, we help to reduce the world's waste.
Aluminum? It's like gold. Oh, yeah.
Environmental defense. Get green. For more environmentally friendly tips, go to getgreen.com.
Oh, there's a bottle.
Where?
Right over there. To your left. To your left. There you go. You got it.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promise.
Okay, hon.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promise.
What kind of man are you?
I'm a father.
Look here, my father was a father, and he smoked his brains out in the house.
Watch as he blows those smoke rings on my little red face.
You probably have asthma.
Asthma? Schmasma. I'm telling you, nothing's gonna happen to your kids. I swear.
Don't swear when you're lying. You know very well that thousands of kids get bronchitis, ear infections, and even pneumonia from their parents' cigarette smoke. And didn't you promise your little angels you'd smoke outside?
Hey, Daddy.
Those little devils are just so sweet.
Do the right thing.
Please, smoke outside.
Until you can stop, go out for your kids.
Take the pledge. Call 1-800-513-1157.